Today we are going to be reacting to a video that I made at the start of this year where I talked about some fantasy series that I wanted to prioritise in 2024. I feel like I've smashed this. I'm feeling quietly confident this year because I know that at the halfway point of the year I'd finished around 5 or 6 series, and even though I haven't been prioritising series as much in the second half of the year, I feel like I've at least read the first book in each of these series. There might be one or two that I've forgotten about, but we're gonna rewatch that video and react to it, and I will tell you whether I did in fact prioritise the series that I wanted to this year. Let me know in the comments if there were any series that you were prioritising in 2024 and if you ended up completing them, if you started them. Let me know all of that good stuff. But I am gonna stick my headphones in. I am gonna skip the intro of this video just because I don't feel like we need to rewatch that. First on my list is the Rook and Rose trilogy by M.A. Carrick. So I did read all of this series actually. I read the first book it might have been June or July. I know that I read all 3 books over the summer. I also read them fairly close together because this has some very detailed and intricate world building, and I was worried that I was going to forget stuff. Loved this series. It's actually become one of my favourite fantasy series of all time, so I'm really glad that I put this on the list because it's one that I'd heard some stuff about, but I do think that generally this series is so underrated. If you like the setting in the Lies of Loch Lamora and you also like books that have some kind of con or heist, then I think this could really work for you. The characters, I thought as well, were really complex and interesting. Next up we have The Radiant Empire duology by Shelley Parker Chan. So I did read She Who Became the Sun, another book that had been on my Kindle for a very long time. I actually buddy read this with Nat. I think it was, again, over the summer, and neither of us liked it very much. I think I gave it 3 stars, but to be honest, I was probably being a little bit generous. I really liked the beginning and I liked a lot of the themes in this. However, the actual experience of reading it was quite slow. I was quite bored for most of this book, and by the time I got to the end I thought I'm not really that fussed about continuing the series. I think one of the main reasons I put this on my list is because there's only 2 books and I thought it would feel really satisfying to finish a duology. But yeah, I didn't like the first book, so I have DNF'd the series and I don't plan on going back to it. Next up we have the Earthsea duology by Octavia E. Butler. So I have read this. I read the entire duology. Like I said, I put a lot of duologies I think on this list because I know that I can get through them quite quickly and they're not as intimidating. I don't want to spoil my best books of the year list, but Parable of the Sower is one of my favourite books of the year. I thought it was such a fascinating exploration of this dystopian situation, and yeah, I need to read more Octavia E. Butler books because I read Kindred a couple of years ago and that was also, I think, a favourite of the year. There's something about Octavia E. Butler's writing that just works for me, so yeah, another success, which is great. A YA series on my list is 6 Crimson Cranes by Elizabeth Lim. So we have another duology on the list, and I have read the first book in this series, which is 6 Crimson Cranes, and I did enjoy it considering I don't read a lot of YA fantasy anymore. I actually really liked the atmosphere in this and I thought the characters were interesting. I'm fairly sure as well the events didn't unfold in the way that I was expecting, so I would pick up the sequel. I do own it, it's on my bookshelves like up here. I don't know whether you can see it, so I do plan on maybe continuing this series, but I feel like I'd need to get to it soon because I read this a few months ago and already the details are starting to feel a little bit hazy, but I gave this first book 4 stars from what I remember. Next on my list is The Darker Shade of Magic trilogy by V. Schwab. So I did not read this. I did remember that this was on the list. However, because this first book was a reread, it was one that I planned to get round to once I'd finished all the other series on this list. I tried to reread the first book by listening to the audiobook and I hated the narration. I don't know what it was about the narrator's voice. It wasn't capturing my attention. I found it really dull to listen to, and I think I got about 2 hours in and realised I hadn't taken anything in. Even though it's a reread, I wanted to enjoy the rereading experience, so I DNF'd the audiobook and I will go back to this physically at some point, but because it's a reread, it wasn't one that I was prioritising over the other books or the other series on this list. These next few series on my list I am actually hoping to start in February. I put some of them on my February TBR, so by the time this video goes live I might have made some progress with them. But first up we have The Atlas 6 by Olivia Blake. I did read this. I read the entire Atlas trilogy by Olivia Blake, and I did end up enjoying it. I know that the third book in particular has very mixed reviews. The average rating on Goodreads gets lower and lower for each book in the series, and I think the Atlas Complex, the last time I checked, had something like a 2.9 average rating, which is quite low. Even now, I still think that is very harsh. I can understand why some people didn't like the conclusion of the series. I never felt that connected to the characters. I never really felt like I cared about them. I was just enjoying the vibe and the atmosphere. It's a very slow moving series and it is very character driven. My enjoyment came from being in this world with these characters and just hanging out with them, observing whatever they wanted to do next. I thought it was a really interesting exploration of a group dynamic. So it really worked for me, but I can also understand why some people do not like this book or this series. Next up we have The Great Cities duology by N.K. Jemisin. So watching this video back is making me realise how much of a great reading year I had in terms of series, because The City We Became and The Great Cities duology by N.K. Jemisin was another 5-star series for me. I actually read the first book while I was in New York, and I think that really helped because this is a series that's set in New York, and there was just something about being in New York City while reading about these characters in New York City. I thought the concept behind this was just fascinating, and there's something about N.K. Jemisin's writing that really works for me. I loved the Broken Earth series, I loved the Great Cities duology, and I really want to go back and read some of her backlist. Would recommend this series if you enjoy speculative fiction or if you enjoy literary fiction but you are looking for something more speculative. But we only have a few more series to go through, the first of which is The Fitz and the Fool trilogy by Robin Hobb. Another series that I did read in 2024 and another series that I would consider a favourite of all time. I have had some really great series this year. Like, I've read some fantastic series in 2024 and this felt even more satisfying because this is the final trilogy within the Realm of the Outlandings world, which I think has 16 books in total. I also read this physically, which I was a little bit scared about, but I couldn't get hold of the audiobooks. The other books in this series I'd read through Everend, but for some reason it wasn't allowing me to access this final series, and I'd also heard that there was a different narrator, and yeah, I decided to read it physically and it flew by. Robin Hobb's writing is very slow, but there was just something about being back with Fitz and seeing him as an older man. I cried more times than I would care to admit. So yeah, another great series that I read in 2024. This next series I am a little bit embarrassed about because I've owned it since 2020 and I still haven't read past the first book. You might even be able to guess what series I'm talking about because I feel like I talk about this series all the time and how I need to finally finish it or continue it. I'm not going to read the whole series this year, I don't think, because some of the books are quite chunky, but I would like to make decent progress on Throne of Glass. I really wanted to build the suspense with that series, didn't I? I have reread Throne of Glass. I reread the first book in the series back in September, and I've also read Crown of Midnight. I read that last month. Then I'm currently reading Assassin's Blade, which is technically the prequel, but I've heard mixed things on the best way to read the series, so I'm reading that now. It's a short story collection and I'm really enjoying it. I'm so glad that I decided to finally continue this series. Even though I didn't love the main character in the first book, I feel like she goes through a lot of growth, and now reading the prequel stories, I'm liking her a lot more. I'm finding her so much more understandable. So another win. I would call this a win, even though I have only read 2.5 of the books in the series. It's a long series, there's 8 books in total, so I never planned to finish this series anyway, but I might end up finishing it in 2025. The final series that I wanted to mention, even though I did read it in January, is The Nightborn Duet by Carissa Broadbent. So I cheated with this series because I made this list at the end of 2023, but then I didn't get around to filming that video in January, so I'd already read one of the series that I had planned to read in 2024, but I still wanted to count it. So The Nightborn Duet by Carissa Broadbent, another great series. Maybe I should do this video again for 2025 because it seems like I'm starting to really learn my taste in fantasy series. This is a romantasy duology set in the Crowns of Nyaxia world. So there's going to be, I think, 6 core books in the series overall. I've read the first duology, and I've also read The Songbird and the Heart of Stone, which came out last month. I love Carissa Broadbent's writing. I think she writes tension really well, and I really like the way that she writes a slow burn romance as well, because a lot of the romantasy books that I've been reading this year have not been slow burns. So yeah, that I think brings us to the end of this video. Let me know in the comments if you have read any of these series and what you thought of them. Let me know as well if you would like to see another of these videos where I talk about my priority series for, it's probably going to be 2025 to 2026, because I do want to prioritize some longer series next year. But let me know if that is something that you would be interested in. Otherwise, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and click subscribe if you would like to see more videos from me. But otherwise, I will see you next time. Bye.